Look into this image entitled The Holographic Cosmogram, taking into account its mutual co-definition, and that the spiral emerges from and returns to 4. Then use your comprehension to understand the ethics encoded within it. Then explain if the consumption and/or the production of media showing human sexuality, including pornography, is for, against, or neutral to those ethics. The Holographic Cosmogram and Ubuntu Ethics, Implications for Media Consumption and Human Sexuality. This analysis examines the philosophical and ethical framework encoded within the Holographic Cosmogram, with particular attention to its grounding in Ubuntu philosophy and the significance of the spiral's emergence from and return to the number 4. The Cosmogram presents a comprehensive worldview that integrates African relational philosophy with holistic principles of existence, offering insights into ethical considerations surrounding media consumption and human sexuality. Through careful interpretation of the diagram's symbolic structure and its relationship to Ubuntu values of interconnectedness, human dignity, and collective well-being, this report evaluates whether the consumption and production of sexual media aligns with, opposes, or remains neutral to the ethics encoded within this cosmological framework. Ubuntu philosophy as the foundation. The Cosmogram's placement of Ubuntu at its apex establishes this African humanist philosophy as the foundational ethical framework for the entire system. Ubuntu, often translated as "I am because we are," represents a comprehensive worldview that emphasizes the interconnectedness of all beings and derives individual humanity from collective relationships. This philosophy asserts that human dignity and well-being are fundamentally relational, requiring individuals to consider their actions' impact on the broader community. The Cosmogram's organization around pronouns I, we, you, and me, us, them reflects Ubuntu's core principle that identity formation occurs through relational processes rather than individual isolation. Archbishop Desmond Tutu's interpretation that we think of ourselves far too frequently as just individuals underscores the philosophy's emphasis on collective consciousness. The inclusion of possessive terms, mine, ours, yours, further illustrates how Ubuntu conceptualizes ownership and responsibility as inherently communal rather than purely individual. Ubuntu's ethical framework centers on reciprocity, common good, peaceful relations, human dignity, and the intrinsic value of human life. These principles manifest in practical values such as caring, sharing, support, humility, and attitude transformation. The philosophy emphasizes friendliness, harmonious relationships, and other regarding actions such as compassion above all else, creating an ethical system that prioritizes collective well-being while maintaining respect for individual dignity. The holographic structure and mutual co-definition. The central geometric form in the cosmogram appears to represent a holographic principle where each part contains information about the whole, reflecting recent developments in holographic cosmology that suggest our universe may function as a hologram. This structure embodies the concept of mutual co-definition, where each element derives meaning and existence from its relationship to all other elements within the system. The cosmogram organizes fundamental philosophical questions around this central structure: who, Father, Holy Spirit, Son, Parent, Virgin Birth, Child, Mother, Sacred Egg, Daughter, what, Self, Imagination, Memory, Life, Reproduction, Biology, Nature, Relationship, Node, Where, When, Eternity, Moment, Instance, Presence, Process, Absence, Infinity, Movement, Particle, Why, Fulfillment, Sacrifice, Longing, Freedom, Restriction, Control, Acceptance, Condition, Denial, and how truth, interpretation, judgment, reality, construction, perception, existence, sensation, experience. This comprehensive framework suggests that ethical considerations must account for multiple dimensions of existence simultaneously. The all section at the bottom identifies principles of equality, operation, quantity, symmetry, recursion, pattern, wholeness, division, fraction, indicating that the ethical system operates through mathematical and geometric principles that reflect Ubuntu's emphasis on balance and reciprocity. These concepts suggest that ethical actions should maintain harmony and proportionality within the larger system. The significance of the spiral and the number 4. The Cosmogram's bottom section depicts a spiral that emerges from and returns to the number 4, accompanied by circular patterns containing various numerical arrangements. This cyclical movement represents the continuous process of manifestation and return that characterizes both Ubuntu philosophy and holographic principles. The number 4 appears to represent a fundamental unity or completeness from which complexity emerges and to which it ultimately returns. In many African cosmological systems, the number 4 represents completeness, stability, and the integration of opposing forces. The spiral's emergence and return suggest that all phenomena, including ethical considerations, arise from and must ultimately harmonize with this fundamental principle of unity. The equation 112 at the bottom reinforces the idea that relationships and interactions create new realities while maintaining connection to their sources. The circular patterns with their numerical arrangements illustrate how individual elements represented by the number 1 interact to create complex relationships represented by various numbers including 2 and 4 while maintaining their essential unity. This mathematical representation parallels Ubuntu's understanding of how individual identity emerges from and contributes to collective well-being. Ethical framework for media and sexuality. Applying the Cosmogram's Ubuntu-based ethical framework to questions of media consumption and human sexuality requires considering how such activities align with principles of interconnectedness, human dignity, collective well-being, and relational responsibility. The framework suggests that ethical evaluation must consider multiple dimensions: the who, all parties involved, what the nature and content of the media, where, when, the context and timing, why, the motivations and purposes, and how, the methods and impacts. Ubuntu's emphasis on human dignity and the intrinsic value of human life provides a crucial lens for evaluating sexual media. The philosophy's focus on other regarding actions such as compassion above all else suggests that any media production or consumption should prioritize the well-being and dignity of all participants. This includes consideration of consent, agency, and the long-term impacts on individuals and communities involved in or affected by such media. The principle of reciprocity, central to Ubuntu, requires examining whether sexual media consumption and production create mutually beneficial relationships or exploit power imbalances. The philosophy's emphasis on caring, sharing, and support suggests that ethical sexual expression should strengthen rather than damage relational bonds within communities. The Cosmogram's holographic principle implies that individual actions have consequences that ripple throughout the entire system, making personal choices inherently communal concerns. Assessment: media consumption and production of human sexuality. Based on the ethical framework encoded within the holographic Cosmogram and its grounding in Ubuntu philosophy, the consumption and production of media depicting human sexuality, including pornography, appears to be conditionally aligned or opposed depending on how such activities embody or violate Ubuntu values. The framework does not provide a blanket approval or condemnation, but rather establishes criteria for ethical evaluation. Aspects that align with Ubuntu ethics include consensual sexual expression that honors human dignity, media that celebrates healthy relationships and mutual respect, content that educates about sexuality in ways that strengthen community bonds, and production processes that ensure fair treatment and genuine agency for all participants. When sexual media emerges from and contributes to relationships characterized by caring, sharing, and mutual support, it can align with Ubuntu values of human interconnectedness and dignity. Aspects that oppose Ubuntu ethics include exploitative production practices that treat human beings as mere objects, content that promotes dehumanization or violence, consumption patterns that damage relational bonds or community cohesion, and media that perpetuates inequality or fails to consider collective well-being. The commercialization of sexuality in ways that prioritize profit over human dignity directly contradicts Ubuntu's emphasis on the intrinsic value of human life and relational responsibility. The Cosmogram's holographic principle suggests that individual choices about sexual media consumption and production inevitably affect the broader community. Ubuntu's emphasis on collective well-being requires considering how such choices impact social relationships, community values, and the dignity of all persons involved. The spiral's return to unity, the number 4, implies that ethical sexual expression should ultimately contribute to, rather than detract from, communal harmony and individual flourishing within relational contexts. Conclusion: the holographic Cosmogram presents a sophisticated ethical framework grounded in Ubuntu philosophy that evaluates human actions, including sexuality and media consumption, through principles of interconnectedness, dignity, and collective well-being. Rather than providing simple prohibitions or permissions, this framework establishes criteria for ethical discernment that consider the relational impact of individual choices on community harmony and human flourishing. The Cosmogram's integration of Ubuntu values with holographic principles suggests that ethical sexuality and media consumption must honor both individual agency and collective responsibility. The spiral's emergence from and return to unity represents the continuous process of ethical reflection and adjustment required to maintain harmony between personal desires and communal well-being. This framework challenges both purely individualistic approaches that ignore community impact and authoritarian approaches that deny personal agency, instead proposing a relational ethics that seeks to optimize dignity and flourishing for all participants within interconnected systems. Future applications of this ethical framework could inform policy development, media regulation, and community education initiatives that seek to balance individual freedom with collective responsibility in matters of sexuality and media consumption. The Cosmogram's comprehensive approach provides a valuable alternative to Western individualistic frameworks and authoritarian restrictions, offering a path towards sexual ethics that honors both personal dignity and communal well-being through the principles of Ubuntu philosophy. What does your understanding imply about sexual orientation, identity, activity, and relationship formation, monogamy, polygamy, polyamory, etc.? Ubuntu ethics and human sexuality. Implications for orientation, identity, and relationship formation. The holographic Cosmogram's Ubuntu-centered ethical framework provides a sophisticated lens for understanding human sexuality that transcends Western binary categories and individualistic assumptions. Through careful analysis of the Cosmogram's structural elements, particularly the spiral's emergence from and return to unity, the multidimensional evaluation categories, and the holographic principle of mutual code definition, a nuanced perspective emerges on sexual orientation, identity formation, sexual activity, and diverse relationship structures. This framework suggests that ethical sexuality must honor both individual authenticity and collective well-being, creating space for diverse expressions while maintaining accountability to community harmony and human dignity. Sexual orientation through Ubuntu relationality. The Cosmogram's foundational Ubuntu principle of I am, because we are fundamentally reframe sexual orientation from an individual characteristic to a relational phenomenon that emerges through community interaction and collective recognition. Rather than viewing sexual orientation as a fixed biological or psychological trait, the Ubuntu framework encoded in the Cosmogram suggests that orientation develops through the dynamic interplay between personal authenticity and communal belonging represented in the who, what, and why dimensions. The search results demonstrate how Ubuntu philosophy has been applied to address HIV/AIDS stigma and discrimination against sexual minorities in African contexts. These applications reveal that Ubuntu's emphasis on human dignity and interconnectedness creates ethical obligations to protect and affirm diverse sexual orientations rather than marginalize them. Archbishop Desmond Tutu's advocacy for LGBTQ+ rights within his Ubuntu-informed worldview exemplifies this approach, showing how the philosophy's core values of caring, sharing, respect, compassion, and social responsibility extend protection to sexual minorities. The Cosmogram's holographic principle suggests that each individual's sexual orientation contains information about the broader human spectrum of sexuality, making diversity a necessary component of collective wholeness rather than a deviation from normality. The numerical patterns in the central geometric structure, particularly the progression from 1 to 2 to 4 and back to 1, represent the continuous process through which individual authenticity 1 engages with relational dynamics 2 to create complex community structures 4 that ultimately return to unity. This cyclical understanding implies that diverse sexual orientations contribute to, rather than detract from, community harmony when properly integrated through Ubuntu values. Identity formation as relational process. The Cosmogram's organization around multiple pronoun categories, I, we, you and me, us, them alongside, mine, ours, yours, reveals identity formation as an inherently relational and contextual process rather than a fixed individual property. This understanding aligns with contemporary African scholarship that emphasizes how gender and sexual identities emerge through community interaction and cultural negotiation rather than individual declaration alone. The what dimension of the Cosmogram explicitly includes self, imagination, memory, life, reproduction, biology, nature, relationship, node, indicating that identity formation must account for both biological realities and relational constructions. This multifaceted approach suggests that sexual and gender identities can legitimately include diverse elements: biological, psychological, social, spiritual, without requiring rigid consistency or conformity to external categories. The Ubuntu emphasis on humanness, compassion, and interconnectedness creates space for identity exploration and expression, while maintaining accountability to community well-being. Research on LGBTQ+ persons in Western Kenya demonstrates how Ubuntu-informed approaches can support identity formation even within challenging social contexts. The study's finding that empowerment processes depend on the context within which the process is occurring, the specific issues being faced, and the population of focus reflects the Cosmogram's multi-dimensional evaluation framework that considers who, what, where, when, why, and how simultaneously. This contextual sensitivity allows for diverse identity expressions while maintaining ethical accountability to collective flourishing. The spiral's emergence from and return to unity 4 suggests that identity formation involves continuous cycles of differentiation and integration, allowing individuals to explore various aspects of themselves while ultimately contributing to communal harmony. This process acknowledges that sexual and gender identities may evolve over time and across contexts while maintaining core commitments to human dignity and relational responsibility. Sexual activity and ethical evaluation. The Cosmogram's comprehensive evaluation framework provides sophisticated criteria for assessing sexual activity that transcends simple prohibitions or permissions. The why dimension explicitly includes fulfillment, sacrifice, longing, freedom, restriction, control, acceptance, condition, denial, suggesting that ethical sexual activity must consider multiple motivational factors and their impact on all participants and the broader community. Ubuntu's emphasis on reciprocity and mutual care, evidenced in its applications to HIV, AIDS prevention and care, creates ethical standards for sexual activity that prioritize informed consent, mutual benefit, and long-term well-being over immediate gratification or exploitation. The search results demonstrate how Ubuntu principles have been successfully applied to address sexual health challenges while maintaining respect for human dignity and cultural values. The how dimensions inclusion of truth, interpretation, judgment, reality, construction, perception, existence, sensation, experience indicates that ethical sexual activity requires honest communication, accurate understanding of consequences, and authentic engagement with both physical and emotional realities. This multidimensional approach prevents reductive evaluations that ignore either biological or relational factors while maintaining accountability for actual outcomes. The Cosmogram's holographic principle suggests that individual sexual choices create ripple effects throughout the community system, making personal sexual activity a matter of collective concern while respecting individual agency. This balance between personal freedom and communal responsibility appears in contemporary Ubuntu applications that support individual sexual health while addressing community-wide impacts of sexual behavior. Relationship formation and structural diversity. The Cosmogram's numerical patterns and geometric structures provide insights into various relationship formations that extend beyond Western monogamous assumptions. The central polyhedron's complex internal structure, showing numbers 1, 2, and 4 in various arrangements, suggests that multiple relationship configurations can achieve ethical integrity when they honor Ubuntu principles of mutual care and collective well-being. The circular patterns at the bottom of the Cosmogram, particularly the overlapping circles containing various numerical arrangements, represent different ways that individual autonomy, 1, can combine to create dyadic relationships, 2, and more complex community structures, 4, while maintaining connection to fundamental unity. This mathematical representation suggests that monogamy, polygamy, polyamory, and other relationship structures can all potentially align with Ubuntu ethics depending on how they embody principles of dignity, reciprocity, and communal benefit. Research on Ubuntu applications in various African contexts reveals flexibility in relationship structures when they serve collective well-being. The philosophy's emphasis on caring, sharing, respect, compassion, and social responsibility provides evaluation criteria for relationship structures rather than predetermined forms, allowing communities to develop arrangements that honor both individual authenticity and collective flourishing. The all-dimensions inclusion of equality, operation, quantity, symmetry, recursion, pattern, wholeness, division. Fraction suggests that ethical relationship structures must demonstrate mathematical principles of balance and proportionality, rather than conforming to arbitrary numerical limits. This approach evaluates relationship structures based on their actual functioning and outcomes rather than their formal characteristics alone. The when, where dimensions temporal and spatial categories, eternity, moment, instance, presence, process, absence, infinity, movement, particle indicate that relationship structures must be evaluated across different timescales and contexts rather than according to universal rules. This temporal sensitivity allows for relationship evolution and adaptation while maintaining core ethical commitments to human dignity and collective well-being. Integration and community accountability. The Cosmogram's spiral structure, emerging from and returning to Unity 4, provides a model for integrating diverse sexual orientations, identities, activities, and relationship structures within cohesive communities. This cyclical process suggests that healthy communities must regularly negotiate between individual authenticity and collective harmony, allowing for diversity while maintaining shared values and mutual accountability. Contemporary applications of Ubuntu philosophy to LGBTQ+ issues demonstrate this integration process in practice, showing how communities can affirm sexual and gender diversity while maintaining cultural continuity and social cohesion. Archbishop Tutu's blessing of same-sex unions while maintaining his commitment to Ubuntu values exemplifies this integrative approach that honors both individual dignity and communal belonging. The Cosmogram's holographic principle implies that sexual and relational diversity strengthens rather than threatens community integrity when properly integrated through Ubuntu values. Each individual's authentic expression contributes unique perspectives and capabilities to the collective, while learning from and contributing to the wisdom of the whole community. Conclusion. The Holographic Cosmogram's Ubuntu-centered ethical framework offers a sophisticated approach to human sexuality that transcends both Western individualism and traditional authoritarianism. By emphasizing relational identity formation, multidimensional ethical evaluation, and cyclical integration processes, this framework creates space for diverse sexual orientations, fluid identity expressions, consensual sexual activities, and various relationship structures while maintaining accountability to collective well-being and human dignity. This approach suggests that ethical sexuality emerges through ongoing dialogue between individual authenticity and communal wisdom, rather than through predetermined rules or unlimited individual choice. The Cosmogram's mathematical and geometric representations provide tools for evaluating sexual and relational choices based on their actual contributions to human flourishing rather than their conformity to external categories. Future applications of this framework could inform policy development, community education, and pastoral care that honor both personal freedom and collective responsibility in matters of human sexuality and relationship formation. Finally, how does your comprehension inform personal sexual expression such as masturbation? Ubuntu Ethics and Personal Sexual Expression, a framework for understanding masturbation. The Holographic Cosmogram's Ubuntu-centered ethical framework provides a sophisticated lens for evaluating personal sexual expression, particularly masturbation, that transcends both shame-based prohibitions and unreflective permissiveness. Through analysis of the Cosmogram's structural elements, including the multidimensional evaluation categories, the holographic principle of mutual co-definition, and the spiral cyclical return to unity, a nuanced understanding emerges that positions personal sexual expression within the broader context of relational well-being and collective flourishing. This framework, supported by contemporary scientific research on masturbation's health benefits and Ubuntu philosophy's applications to sexual health, suggests that ethical personal sexual expression must honor both individual authenticity and communal responsibility while contributing to overall human dignity and well-being. Ubuntu Relationality and Personal Sexual Expression. The Cosmogram's foundational Ubuntu principle of I am, because we are fundamentally reframes personal sexual expression from a purely individual matter to a relational phenomenon that affects both personal well-being and community harmony. Ubuntu philosophy emphasizes that each individual's humanity is expressed in relation with others, and a person can only be a person through others, suggesting that even solitary sexual activities carry relational implications through their impact on individual health, emotional state, and capacity for healthy community participation. Recent research demonstrates that Ubuntu values of caring, sharing, respect, compassion, and social responsibility extend to sexual health contexts, including the promotion of safe sexual behaviors and positive attitudes towards sexual well-being. This philosophical framework creates ethical obligations for individuals to care for their own sexual health as part of their responsibility to the broader community. The Ubuntu tradition's rule of conduct and social ethics emphasizes that personal well-being contributes to collective flourishing, making self-care, including appropriate sexual self-care, an ethical imperative rather than mere personal preference. The Cosmogram's organization around pronoun categories I, we, you, and me, us, them illustrates how personal actions affect relational dynamics. When individuals maintain their physical and emotional health through appropriate sexual expression, they enhance their capacity to contribute positively to community relationships. Conversely, when personal sexual expression creates shame, dysfunction, or relational difficulties, it undermines both individual and collective well-being. Scientific evidence in holistic well-being, Contemporary research strongly supports the integration of healthy personal sexual expression within broader frameworks of human well-being, aligning with Ubuntu's emphasis on holistic health and community flourishing. Systematic reviews demonstrate that masturbation is a healthy sexual behavior associated with different sexual functioning dimensions, which highlights sexual satisfaction as an important manifestation of sexual well-being. This evidence supports the Cosmogram's what dimension, which includes life, reproduction, biology, nature, relationship, as interconnected aspects requiring ethical consideration. Research on masturbation as a coping strategy reveals its potential benefits for dealing with psychological distress and for enhancing general well-being, indicating that personal sexual expression can serve legitimate health functions that contribute to individual capacity for community participation. Studies examining hormonal responses show that masturbation affects testosterone and cortisol levels in ways that may support overall health and well-being, while epidemiological research suggests that frequent ejaculation reduces the risk of prostate cancer through multiple biological mechanisms. The World Association for Sexual Health's recognition that sexual pleasure is a component of overall health and human well-being aligns with Ubuntu's holistic understanding of human flourishing. This perspective positions appropriate personal sexual expression as contributing to, rather than detracting from, community well-being by maintaining individual health and emotional balance. The Cosmogram's all-dimension, which includes equality, operation, quantity, symmetry, recursion, pattern, wholeness, suggests that ethical personal sexual expression should maintain balance and proportionality within the larger system of human flourishing. Multi-dimensional ethical evaluation. The Cosmogram's comprehensive evaluation framework provides sophisticated criteria for assessing personal sexual expression that considers who, what, where, when, why, and how dimensions simultaneously. The WHO dimensions emphasis on relational categories suggests that even solitary sexual activity affects one's capacity for healthy relationships with Father, Holy Spirit, Son, Parent, Virgin Birth, Child Mother, Sacred Egg, Daughter, representing the full spectrum of human relational connections. The Y dimension explicitly includes fulfillment, sacrifice, longing, freedom, restriction, control, acceptance, condition, denial, providing categories for evaluating motivations behind personal sexual expression. Ubuntu ethics would support masturbation motivated by legitimate needs for fulfillment, freedom, and acceptance, while questioning expressions driven by compulsion, denial of relationality, or avoidance of authentic intimacy. Research demonstrates that masturbation's positive effects occur regardless of the mode of stimulation, suggesting that the ethical evaluation focuses on motivations and outcomes rather than specific techniques. The where, when dimensions temporal categories, eternity, moment, instance, presence, process, absence, infinity, movement, particle indicate that ethical personal sexual expression must consider timing, context, and life stage appropriateness. The Cosmogram suggests that healthy sexuality involves presence and process, rather than compulsive patterns that disconnect individuals from broader relational and temporal contexts. The how dimension's inclusion of truth, interpretation, judgment, reality, construction, perception, existence, sensation, experience emphasizes that ethical personal sexual expression requires honest self-awareness, accurate understanding of impacts, and authentic engagement with both physical and emotional realities. This multidimensional approach prevents both shame-based rejection and unreflective acceptance of all sexual behaviors while maintaining accountability for actual outcomes. Integration through the spiral pattern. The Cosmogram spiral structure, emerging from and returning to Unity 4, provides a model for integrating personal sexual expression within the broader context of human flourishing and community harmony. This cyclical movement suggests that healthy personal sexuality involves regular cycles of individual expression and relational integration, allowing for personal authenticity while maintaining connection to collective values and responsibilities. The numerical patterns at the bottom of the cosmogram, particularly the overlapping circles containing various arrangements of 1, 2, and 4, represent how individual autonomy 1 can maintain connection to dyadic relationships 2 and broader community structures 4, while preserving fundamental unity. This mathematical representation suggests that personal sexual expression, including masturbation, can serve individual needs while contributing to, rather than detracting from, relational capacity and community well-being. Research on psychological and physiological benefits of sexual activity, both partnered and solo sex, demonstrates correlation with higher life satisfaction, supporting the cosmogram's understanding that personal and communal well-being are interconnected rather than competing values. The spiral's return to unity implies that ethical personal sexual expression should ultimately enhance rather than diminish one's capacity for authentic intimacy and community participation. Self-care as Ubuntu responsibility. The cosmogram's ethical framework positions appropriate personal sexual expression as a form of self-care that serves broader Ubuntu values rather than conflicting with them. Research on self-care processes demonstrates that they help patients to control emotions, adhere to treatment, understand the treatment rationale, improve quality of life, reduce stress and anxiety, feel more secure, and increase life satisfaction, indicating that personal well-being practices serve collective interests by maintaining individual capacity for healthy community participation. Ubuntu's emphasis on compassion, reciprocity, dignity, harmony, and humanity to strengthen communities creates ethical obligations for individuals to maintain their physical and emotional health through appropriate means, including healthy sexual expression. The philosophy's understanding that individual well-being affects community flourishing supports personal sexual practices that contribute to, rather than detract from, overall health and relational capacity. The cosmogram's holographic principle suggests that individual self-care practices contain information about and affect the broader community system. When personal sexual expression enhances individual health, emotional balance, and relational capacity, it serves Ubuntu values by strengthening the individual's ability to contribute to collective well-being. Conversely, when personal sexual patterns create dysfunction, compulsion, or relational avoidance, they undermine both individual and community flourishing. Ethical guidelines for personal sexual expression. Based on the cosmogram's Ubuntu-centered framework and supporting scientific evidence, ethical personal sexual expression, including masturbation, should embody several key principles. Respect for human dignity requires treating one's own body and sexuality with care and reverence rather than objectification or abuse. Relational responsibility involves ensuring that personal sexual practices enhance rather than diminish one's capacity for authentic intimacy and community participation. Holistic integration requires considering how personal sexual expression affects physical health, emotional well-being, spiritual development, and social relationships. Proportionality and balance suggests that personal sexual expression should maintain appropriate frequency and intensity that supports, rather than disrupts, other life activities and relationships. And authentic presence involves engaging with personal sexuality through honest self-awareness and genuine acceptance rather than compulsion, shame, or disconnection. The framework also emphasizes temporal appropriateness, recognizing that healthy sexuality involves presence and process rather than compulsive patterns, and community consciousness, maintaining awareness of how personal sexual choices affect one's capacity to contribute to collective well-being. These guidelines provide practical criteria for evaluating personal sexual practices while honoring both individual autonomy and communal responsibility. Conclusion. The holographic cosmogram's Ubuntu-centered ethical framework offers a sophisticated approach to personal sexual expression that transcends both shame-based prohibitions and unreflective permissiveness. By positioning personal sexuality within the broader context of relational well-being and community flourishing, this framework validates appropriate personal sexual expression, including masturbation, as a legitimate aspect of self-care that can contribute to rather than detract from Ubuntu values, when practiced with awareness, balance, and respect for human dignity. This approach suggests that ethical personal sexual expression emerges through ongoing integration of individual authenticity with communal responsibility rather than through predetermined rules or unlimited individual license. The Cosmogram's mathematical and geometric representations provide tools for evaluating personal sexual practices based on their actual contributions to human flourishing rather than their conformity to external categories. Contemporary scientific research supporting the health benefits of appropriate masturbation aligns with Ubuntu's holistic understanding of human well-being, reinforcing the framework's validity for contemporary applications. Future research could explore how Ubuntu-informed approaches to sexual education and therapy might support healthier integration of personal sexuality within community contexts, potentially offering alternatives to both Western individualistic approaches and authoritarian restrictions that ignore legitimate human needs for sexual well-being and expression.